Dear foster fathers, the full text has been completed. Produced by Zichen. Must be a high-quality product. Before you watch, start cultivating good habits. Zichen reminds everyone to fasten your seatbelts. Get ready to depart. The main text begins. After Liu Ryan kicked me, she was ready to go to Tsinghua University with the handsome top student. But after the college entrance exam, I, as the only student who got into Tsinghua, was chosen to give a speech. I went on stage to speak, while the two of them could only watch from below. My girlfriend Liu Ryan and I were caught having an early romance. The homeroom teacher called our parents. Liu Ryan's mother unleashed her fury on me. At this moment, this thin, middle-aged woman stood in front of me, spitting with rage. So young, yet you're so good at chasing girls. Our Ryan will go to Tsinghua or Peking University in the future. And what are you? Why don't you take a look at yourself in a puddle of water? Probably you'll only end up at a vocational school, working on an assembly line in a factory. If you ruin her future, can you take responsibility? I wiped the spit off my face that she had sprayed on me, and turned my head to look at my girlfriend Liu Ryan. She lowered her head, avoiding my gaze, without saying a word. My mother, standing beside me, angrily retorted, "What did you say? Just because your grades are good, you think you're great? Maybe you'll end up just being a bookworm." Liu Ryan's mother, hearing this, got even more excited. "Even that would be better than your son who scores less than 100 points in total. What are you going to do about it if you can't control him? I'll do it for you." As she said this, she raised her hand to slap me. But my mother quickly intercepted her. The two women started fighting, and the scene descended into chaos. At this moment, the door was suddenly pushed open. The class monitor, Mei Jibo, walked in carrying a stack of papers. He stepped into the room, his eyes constantly glancing over in this direction. Mei Jibo, who was previously ranked first in the grade, had sat in the front during the parent-teacher meeting. Liu Ryan's mother recognized him. Seeing Mei Jibo enter, her arrogance grew even stronger. She sneered through gritted teeth. "Even if my daughter were to find someone, it would never be your useless son. If my daughter were to choose, she'd choose the top of the class." I noticed Mei Jibo's face blush slightly as he stole a glance at Liu Ryan. Liu Ryan looked up and met his gaze, but quickly averted her eyes. This farce finally ended, with the homeroom teacher's neutral reprimand to both sides. Though Liu Ryan had good grades, my family was wealthy, and we often gifted the homeroom teacher. The teacher couldn't bring herself to be too harsh, and only gently reminded us that students should focus primarily on their studies. Mei Jibo, you all should concentrate on your academics from now on. I could tell that deep down, the homeroom teacher was still on Liu Ryan's side. After all, dating the last in the class, with the second in the grade, anyone would think that I was dragging Liu Ryan down. That very night, Liu Ryan broke up with me. She messaged me on WeChat saying she had been thinking for the past few days, and that students should indeed focus on their studies. She hoped we could talk about other things after the college entrance exam. I didn't blame her. After all, she had such good grades, and had always aimed for Tsinghua University. I could understand her desire not to hinder her studies. But what I didn't expect was that just a few days later, Liu Ryan officially announced her relationship with Mei Jibo. In her moments on WeChat, I saw she and Mei Jibo simultaneously posted a photo taken in the library, hand in hand. The caption read, "Being with the right person will only make you better and better." Below the post were countless blessings and well wishes. The first and second in the grade are together. Imagine how smart their children will be. Q180, for sure, the photo was beautifully taken, with the sunlight streaming in from the window, gently illuminating their intertwined fingers. The boy's hand was slender and elegant. Exactly the kind of hand Liu Ryan liked. Yes, she had always been fond of someone like Mei Jibo. He had a good appearance with long, straight black hair, and an innocent, pure demeanor. His grades were always far ahead of others. He was practically the main character in a youth romance film, and I was just someone she reluctantly tolerated after my persistent advances. My hand holding the phone trembled slightly as I slowly realized what Liu Ryan meant. The so-called focus on studies was just an excuse to break up with me. However, she didn't even bother to fully carry out this excuse. Just a few days after the breakup, she eagerly posted such a WeChat moment without any consideration for my feelings. Yes, the love between top students is truly beautiful. They would go to Tsinghua together and have a bright future ahead. And I was nothing more than a misfit, an outcast in this love story, seen as a defective product by everyone. I picked up my phone to call Liu Ryan. It took a long time for her to answer. I wanted to curse her out, to lash out at her. But as soon as I opened my mouth, my throat tightened. Liu Ryan, what do you mean by this? I choked up. Weren't you supposed to focus on your studies? Liu Ryan was silent for a moment, then softly apologized. Feelings like this are beyond my control. Jibo and I were never meant to be. He's different from you. When I'm with Jibo, it won't affect my studies. And what about me? I cried out in agony. What about me? Haven't I treated you well enough? Sorry, Liu Ryan's voice was slow but resolute. You might be pitiful, but I can't do anything about it. I heard a faint male voice through the receiver. It was Mei Jibo's voice. Ryan, I found the book. Liu Ryan's voice became a bit flustered. I won't say any more. Please don't contact me again. And with that, she hung up the phone. My vision gradually blurred as tears uncontrollably flowed from my stinging eyes. In that moment, I felt that not only was my heart trampled upon, but so was my dignity. I was discarded without mercy, like an old, worthless book, all because of my poor grades. Being with me would affect her studies, but being with Mei Jibo wouldn't. They were a golden couple. And what was I? I was just a nobody, a good-for-nothing. I cried all night. When I got up the next morning, my eyes were so swollen that I could barely open them. My temples throbbed with pain. I felt that my entire life was full of suffering. Yet a tiny spark ignited in my heart, and it grew into a blazing fire. I vowed to study hard, to make those who looked down on me regret it, to prove myself. Though saying I would study hard was easier said than done, however, doing it was incredibly difficult. I had wasted my entire first year of high school, and up until now in my second year, I hadn't studied at all. All my energy was spent playing games, chasing celebrities, going clubbing and surfing the internet. I really thought studying was pointless. My family was wealthy, and even if I couldn't get into a university, my parents would find a way to send me abroad. So why should I exhaust myself studying? In a year and a half of high school, I hadn't completed a single assignment. During exams, I either handed in blank papers or scribbled something randomly. I consistently ranked among the bottom 3 in my grade. After thinking for a long time, I decided to start by catching up on the first-year content. But as soon as I opened the book, I recognized all the words. Yet together they looked like a foreign language. I forced myself to read for 10 minutes. But I couldn't take in anything more. My mind was filled with golden stars, and I couldn't stop yawning one after another. It was too difficult. This was really too hard. I clearly remember Liu Ryan solving problems without much thought, her pen moving effortlessly. It didn't seem that difficult for her. I started to lose my determination. After all, my family was rich. So what if they got into Tsinghua? Maybe someday they'd end up working for me. I squeezed the pen in my hand and opened the book on my desk again. Damn it, I'll study a little more. Studying was truly painful, but once I pushed through the initial struggle, it didn't seem so agonizing anymore. I even felt a slight sense of satisfaction. While reading the history book, I remembered going with my mom to see the Terracotta Army. But what did the first emperor do after sweeping across the 6 states? I had never really understood that. I never expected it to be like this. Such grandeur and vision. It was truly astonishing. Before, I had never taken any notes. My textbooks were full of doodles drawn during class. I had even added a mustache and changed the hairstyle on the portrait of Qinshai Huang. Back then, it was just to pass the time. But now, as I seriously looked at it, I felt somewhat uneasy. I flipped through the history book, page by page, not even remembering when I fell asleep. I had forgotten it myself. The next morning, when the alarm rang, I found that I had fallen asleep at my desk, with the imprint of the book's pages still on my face. As I walked into school that morning, I bumped into Mei Jibo. My buddies gathered around, asking where we were going to hang out that night. "There's a new bar that opened on Nanjing Road," said one of them. "I heard there are lots of pretty girls. Let's go tonight." Mei Jibo walked past us, glancing at us sideways. He didn't say a word. His expression didn't even change. But I could clearly see the disdain in his eyes. It was a look of contempt, as if he had seen something filthy. In his eyes, we seemed like nothing but a pile of trash, worthless and not even in the same league as him. And to be honest, that might be true. Wherever he went, classmates and teachers showered him with praise. But when people talked about someone like me, they'd always say, "That troublemaker." "Jibo, say something. I'll treat you tonight." "I'm not going. I have something to do tonight." I didn't have the courage to say that I was going home to study. They would definitely laugh at me. "Come on, what's the big deal?" Seeing that they couldn't persuade me, they scoffed, hissed, and then turned away. I watched Mei Jibo's back. He waved at Liu Ryan from a short distance away, then quickly walked up to her and put his arm around her waist. Liu Ryan linked her arm with his. They looked just like the perfect couple. I stood there in a daze. They were dating. But the homeroom teacher never called their parents. I heard that Mei Jibo had promised the teacher that his grades would never slip. So even though early romance was forbidden, they could flaunt it without any fear. Yes, when the top 2 students in the grade are together, how could it possibly affect their academics? They were a match made in heaven. It seemed everyone just accepted it. Not far away, Mei Jibo said something to Liu Ryan, and Liu Ryan subtly turned her head to glance at me. The smile on her face instantly faded. In her eyes was the same contempt that Mei Jibo had. I wanted so badly to rush up and slap her, but I knew what the consequences of that would be. So I just stood there, staring at their backs as they walked away, until they were completely out of sight. The first class today was history. To be honest, I was terrible at both humanities and science subjects, but back then, Liu Ryan chose history, along with politics and biology as her electives, so I carelessly chose the same subjects, just so we could sit together during class. It wasn't until now that I realized why Liu Ryan had chosen these 3 subjects. I looked at Mei Jibo sitting at the front. The teacher was bending over, discussing something with him. It turned out that Mei Jibo had chosen these 3 subjects, so she had followed and picked the same ones. Maybe she had liked Mei Jibo all along. I didn't say anything. I just opened the textbook I was reading yesterday. Coincidentally, we were currently reviewing first-year history. The lesson today was exactly what I had read last night. In the past, I never paid attention during class. I would secretly play with my phone, read novels, pass notes, chat anything but the actual lesson. But today, I watched Liu Ryan and Mei Jibo, their heads down, focused on studying. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to take out my phone from my pocket. I opened my textbook, forcing myself to concentrate. Yesterday, I had only skimmed through it, just briefly glancing over the pages. But strangely enough, it was completely different this time. As the teacher lectured, I actually found myself paying attention. Before, his voice was like a monotonous chant, in one ear and out the other, making me drowsy. But now I could actually understand what he was saying. My brain was actively processing as the teacher explained. I was even surprised to discover that after he finished explaining a small point, I could remember all the key details. I gradually became excited. My eyes were glued to the page of the textbook. I even forgot about Liu Ryan and Emi Jibo. Could it be that I'm actually a genius? I decided to start over. From the beginning of the chapter, I decided to memorize the measures Qinshai Huang took to consolidate his rule. Just as I was deeply focused on reciting, the history teacher suddenly pointed at Emi Jibo. Let's start with you. Emi Jibo confidently stood up and flawlessly recited the passage. Politically, the central government implemented the 3 lords and 9 ministers system. Locally, the feudal system was abolished, and the county system was established, strengthening control over local authorities and maintaining central authority. Economically, the measurement standards were unified, and a uniform currency was implemented. His voice was clear and pleasant, without a single stumble throughout the entire passage. He recited it smoothly and effortlessly. The teacher adjusted his glasses and smiled with satisfaction. Very good, next. The next few students didn't perform as well. Many could only remember 3 sentences and forgot 2. The teacher was visibly displeased. You're not well prepared. Go home and memorize it again. If you still can't remember it tomorrow, you'll stand during the entire class. Next, I slowly stood up. The whole class fell silent in an instant. Liu Ryan turned her head to look at me. Her face slightly darkened. Emi Jibo glanced at me as well, a hint of mockery flashing in his eyes. I knew why they all reacted this way. As the most consistent last-place student, I was known for openly not studying. Usually at times like this, I would pretend not to hear, and the teacher, already accustomed to it, would just call on the next student. But today, the teacher slightly frowned. I took a deep breath, pretending not to notice the curious or mocking gazes around me, and began to recite the points I had just memorized. Although I hesitated once due to nervousness, I managed to recite it quite fluently. The history teacher looked at me with surprise. The teacher's tightly furrowed brows gradually relaxed. After a moment, a slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Very good, excellent. It's clear you've studied this seriously. Keep it up like this. Not bad at all. Sit down. The surrounding classmates let out soft gasps of surprise. The mockery on Emi Jibo's face stiffened. He shot me a sidelong glance, then turned his head away. I felt my face grow warm, and I awkwardly sat down. I was sure my ears must have turned red, but inside I felt a strange sense of joy. It was the first time a teacher had ever praised me. The first time in my life. The feeling was truly incredible. It was nothing like going to a bar, seeing a beautiful girl, or my parents giving me a large allowance, or buying an expensive bag. This was a different kind of happiness, a joy that came from deep within my heart. It was as if a flower had bloomed inside me. I was even a bit shy from the teacher's approval. Almost instantly, I found myself liking history class. I didn't want to be at the bottom anymore. At least in history, I wanted to score higher. When the bell rang, I was surprised to realize that 45 minutes had already passed. Usually, it felt like torture. I would count the seconds until it was over. But today, it seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. I hadn't had enough yet. I glanced at my textbook. It was already filled with dense notes, looking completely out of place compared to my other textbooks. A deep sense of satisfaction welled up inside me. I couldn't wait to fill all my textbooks with notes. Emi Jibo and Liu Ryan walked past me, but I paid them no mind. Instead, I was thinking about that night's history homework. That evening, I did something unprecedented. I went straight to my room and started doing homework. My mom was startled. She wanted to talk to me but hesitated. I overheard her whispering excitedly outside the room. "Did you see that, old Chiao? He's studying." Her voice was filled with disbelief and joy. My dad, sounding pleased, said, "The kid's grown up. He's becoming more sensible." I couldn't help but smile slightly, and I buried my head back into the workbook. Before long, my history grades began to improve significantly. The history teacher was a bit like an old-fashioned official, always with a stern face, and looked somewhat strict, but he didn't hesitate to praise me. When I had memorized the answers well, when I completed my homework correctly, when I paid attention in class, he would always notice. The more he praised me, the more motivated I became to study. I even started reviewing history during other classes. At night, when I got home, I would go over the history textbook we were studying, from cover to cover, though I only studied for an hour. It was a dramatic change compared to before. It was like night and day. Soon, the first monthly exam of the new semester arrived. When I received the history paper, I glanced over the questions, feeling quite confident. Most of these questions were ones I had memorized recently. Honestly, history isn't that difficult. It doesn't even require a strong foundation. As long as you have a good memory, you can memorize everything. I began writing quickly, and soon, I had finished all the questions. However, the other subjects were not as easy. I had been focusing solely on history these past days, barely glancing at the other subjects. I had only listened a bit during class. The questions on these exams looked slightly more familiar than before, but as for the answers, I still wasn't sure. Frustrated, I could only grit my teeth and make educated guesses. At least I didn't hand in a blank paper. After finishing all the exams, I began to feel anxious. For the first time, I had seriously completed an exam. How would I perform? Would I improve or remain at the bottom? Would the history teacher be disappointed in my scores? Emi Jibo and Liu Ryan would definitely laugh at me again, wouldn't they? All these thoughts swirled together, making my head feel like it was about to explode. I couldn't focus on studying anything else. It was like waiting for a judgment day. Soon enough, the monthly exam results were released. I watched Emi Jibo as he handed out the test papers. I couldn't help but take a deep breath. When he reached me, he glanced at my paper. His brows furrowed deeply. He scanned up and down, staring at it for a good 10 seconds, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. After a moment, he passed by my seat and tossed the paper onto my desk. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be nervous. I picked up the paper with my eyes closed. It took me a long time to muster the courage to open them. A huge red number flashed before my eyes. History 92. I was completely stunned. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. Those who have never been a failing student could hardly understand this feeling. I had always scored in the single digits. Breaking into double digits was a matter of sheer luck, but this time I actually scored in the 90s. Is this really my score, Jibo DA's score? I couldn't help but laugh foolishly, flipping the paper over and over to check it several times. The few points I lost were on questions I hadn't seen before. After all, my foundation was too weak. I hadn't yet caught up on all the previous material. Just as I was basking in my joy, the history teacher walked in. The whole class immediately fell silent. He stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat softly, and without any unnecessary words, he directly pulled out the exam papers. This time, the questions were quite difficult, but many of our students did well. This was unexpected for me. He then picked up a list. There are 3 students who scored above 90. Emi Jibo, 99. Liu Ryan, 98. Then the history teacher smiled. And also Jibo Da. My heart began to pound wildly. Jibo Da has been working very hard recently, and is quite smart too. Making such progress is a great achievement. Jibo Das scored 92 points. Don't get complacent. Keep working hard. And aim for 100 next time. The whole class erupted in surprise. All my classmates turned to look at me in astonishment, whispering among themselves. I saw that Liu Ryan's expression was very complicated. While Emmy Ijibo's face had turned ashen, in that instant, I couldn't help but smile uncontrollably. A smile full of joy and pride. It was a sense of accomplishment. At that moment, the value of my life seemed to have reached a new height. In just a single instant, I went from being the class's despised troublemaker to someone who stood out, even if it was just in one subject. But at least it showed that my efforts were paying off. No wonder everyone is told to study hard. So this is what it feels like to excel in studies. A mix of pride and satisfaction, enough to make someone feel on top of the world. I couldn't even remember how I got through the rest of the class. When the bell rang, a few boys gathered around, sitting next to Mei Jibo chatting. Normally, top students carry a natural aura of authority and always have a few followers around them. It seemed like they were deliberately trying to annoy me, speaking loudly on purpose. Some people can't study well, and their brains don't work either. Even if they cheat, they don't do it convincingly. Who would believe they went from single digits to 90s? It's useless. Just self-deception. Mei Jibo, you're still the best. Another 99, how impressive. How do you manage it? Mei Jibo's expression softened a bit. He smiled and said, 99. I lost 1 point because of carelessness. I really shouldn't have. You guys know me. I never study at home. What others do is none of our concern. Being clever only works for a short time, not forever. I actually find it a bit pathetic to fail both in academics and in love. He smirked, and those around him joined in the mocking laughter. I clenched the paper in my hand, feeling my earlier good mood vanish completely. A surge of anger rushed to my head. I felt like a string in my mind had snapped. Suddenly, I stood up and strode over to Mei Jibo. My expression must have been quite frightening. Mei Jibo was startled by my approach, but quickly recovered and sneered. Jibo, what are you doing? Are you planning to hit someone? You troublemakers aren't good at studying, but you sure know how to cause trouble. One of you is worth two in that regard. Suppressing the fury burning inside me, I said, Mei Jibo, what did you just say? If you've got the guts, say it again. Good words don't need to be repeated. He looked at me with contempt. Only the guilty take it personally. Jibo, sometimes I truly pity you. To attract attention, you have to resort to such petty tricks. His words were like a steel blade stabbing straight into my heart. I was so enraged that I was about to say something, but then I felt a sudden shove on my shoulder. Caught off guard, I stumbled and hit the corner of the desk behind me. Sharp pain shot through my waist. When I looked up, it was Liu Ryan. She was clinging to Mei Jibo, her face full of disapproval as she looked at me. Jibo, what are you doing? Mei Jibo is not like you. Don't bring your low-life behavior into this. I was about to lose my mind with anger and shouted, he accused me of cheating. Didn't you hear? Liu Ryan's expression became complicated. Jibo, using clever tricks won't help. Everyone knows what's really going on. I suggest you focus on your studies seriously. Stop trying to be smart. In that moment, a wave of rage nearly consumed me entirely. My mind went blank. I felt an overwhelming urge to grab a knife and end these two wretches in front of me. Just because you're good at studying, does that make you superior? Does being a top student give you the right to look down on others and accuse them falsely? Before I could even think, the words slipped out of my mouth. What makes you so great? I'll definitely surpass you in the final exams. The entire class fell silent for a moment and then burst into laughter, especially the group of guys around Mei Jibo. They were laughing so hard they could hardly stand. Jibo, if you're going to boast, at least make it believable. MEI Jibo is the top of the grade. You think you can surpass him? Bluffing doesn't cost a thing, does it? Keep dreaming. Hey ha ha. Even MEI Jibo chuckled. Jibota, if you can surpass me, I'll do whatever you ask. But if you don't, you'll stand at the school gate and shout 3 times. I, Jibota, am worthless. Do you dare? The confidence and disdain in his eyes made my blood boil. Fine, if I surpass you, you'll bow and apologize to me at the school gate and admit you're not as good as me. Whatever you want, he sneered. You're just setting yourself up for humiliation. Ridiculous. I scoffed back. Don't act all high and mighty. Just don't regret it later. With that, I grabbed my bag and walked out of the classroom. Talking big felt good in the moment. But as soon as I left the school gates, I regretted it. I slapped my forehead, feeling a wave of regret wash over me. Why couldn't I just keep quiet? If worst comes to worst, I could have just had someone beat them up later. But why did I have to go challenge him? Now what? The finals are only a few months away. How could I possibly surpass MEI Jibo? This is completely impossible. Stupid, I cursed myself. When I got home, I was still worried, not knowing what to do next. If I really have to go to the school gate and shout 3 times that I'm worthless, I might as well bash my head in and die. Just as I was wallowing in despair, my mom suddenly knocked on the door. Boda, come out for a moment. Your sister Yu is here. I responded impatiently. Who's you? Yue. I jumped up instantly, startling my mom. Don't be rude to your sister Yu. Come out and talk to her. Perfect timing. This was like a pillow coming just when I needed to sleep. I rushed out and pushed the door open. Sister Yu, you're here. Yue was sitting on our sofa, the evening sun filtering through the window, casting a golden glow on her slender figure, making her look almost unreal. She was so beautiful that it didn't seem real. Hearing my voice, she turned her head slightly, her peach blossom eyes lifting just a bit. With a hint of amusement, she said, well, the sun must be rising in the west. Why didn't you call me a bookworm today? I blushed. Yue is the daughter of my mom's best friend, and ever since she was a child, she's been a legend in our neighborhood. She started skipping grades in elementary school, and by middle school, she was already self-studying high school courses. Even though she's only a few years older than me, she's already pursuing a combined master's and PhD at Tsinghua University. Back then, she was already guaranteed a spot at Tsinghua, but insisted on taking the college entrance exam, and of course, she aced it with terrifyingly high scores. People like her aren't even human. It's like her head isn't just a head, but a supercomputer. Just thinking about it makes you shudder. Back when I was a troublemaker, I couldn't stand people like her. Pretty, smart, and perfect in every way. With a good family background, she was like the sun in the sky, so bright, making me look like a pile of mud in comparison. But now, things were different. I needed her. With Yue around. What is MEI Jibo? Even Liu Ryan would be within my grasp. Yue is going to stay at home for a while. You two haven't seen each other in a long time. Boda, come and chat with your sister Yu. I'll go wash some fruit. I forced a charming smile. Sister Yu, you're back. Yue looked at me as if she had seen something unclean, and cautiously leaned back. Gee, Boda, what's wrong with you? My smile froze. But I leaned in closer and said in a playful tone, Sister Yu, I remember you scored 740 on your college entrance exam, right? Actually, it was 739. Yue corrected, nonchalantly. Gee, Boda, whatever scheme you're plotting, I advise you to drop it. Damn, no wonder she hasn't found a boyfriend yet. Yue is like a stone in a latrine. Stinky and hard. I forced down my anger and said, Sister Yu, we've practically grown up together. Can you really bear to see me fail to get into college? Can you just ignore that? I finally decided to cut to the chase and state my request directly. Sister Yu, can you tutor me? Tutor you? Yuyue finally showed some expression. Tutor you? She looked at me with a mix of shock and suspicion. Boater. Are you possessed by something unclean? I couldn't take it anymore, and finally dropped the pretense. Yuyue, just tell me, will you tutor me or not? I'm turning over a new leaf. Is that so hard to believe? If you don't tutor me, I'll go complain to your mom. Yuyue's mom didn't have a son, so she especially adored young girls like her, but she liked me even more. If her mom found out that she refused to help me study, she'd probably scold her to death. As expected, Yuyue's expression stiffened. After a moment, she gritted her teeth and said, Boater, you really know how to push your luck. What kind of trouble are you trying to stir up now? I grabbed her arm earnestly and pleaded. Sister, I want to get into Tsinghua. Please help me get into Tsinghua. My girlfriend dumped me for a top student. I made a bet with them. I promised to surpass them by the end of the semester. I thought Yue would laugh at me like everyone else, but instead, she just looked surprised for a moment, then irritably scratched her head. Boater, did you lose your mind because of this relationship? What's in it for me? Aren't you starting a business? I eagerly offered. I'll give you all my New Year's money. Yue let out a cold laugh. If I had to rely on your little bit of New Year's money, I'd be in trouble. You better study hard. Got it, she snapped. If you don't study properly, I'll beat you up. I thought for a moment and realized why she didn't think I was being unrealistic. For someone like her, a human calculator, getting into Tsinghua probably wasn't even a challenge. I'd struck gold. I stared at her with wide eyes. Seriously. Alright, you can beat me up if I don't do well. Yuyue was incredibly efficient. She was ready to start tutoring me right then and there. Curious, I asked, Sister, aren't you going to review first? She scoffed, Review? What's that for? She curled her lips into a mocking smile. For basic stuff like 1-1-E2, you think I need to study? I decided not to get annoyed. Fine, no more wasting time, let's start. I sighed and pulled out a dreaded math book. I have a good memory, so subjects like history and politics that rely on memorization come to me quickly. But when it comes to logical reasoning, Yuyue didn't waste any time and started right from first-year material. Try solving this problem first. Let me see how strong your foundation is. I looked at the problem. It was a geometry question. One of those spatial perspective diagrams. Just looking at it made my eyes blur. Forget about solving it. I couldn't even fully understand the question. Point A, point B, point C what? My head started to ache. Seeing Yui's impatient expression, I nervously admitted, Sister, I don't know how to do it. Where are you stuck? She asked, almost exasperated. Where can't you do it? Cautiously, I replied, I can't do any of it. I don't even understand the question. Yuyui's face gradually grew serious. She touched my forehead and thought for a while. After a moment, she seriously said, Boater, maybe you're mentally challenged. I mean, perhaps you have a natural intellectual disability. Have you ever been tested? Furious, I slammed the book into her face. I'm going to tell your mom. Alright, she said, pulling the book off her face and spreading it open again. Let's get on with it. Look here. This is point A and it connects with a line. To point C, she drew a line on the book with her pen. So now, what does this form? I looked at it. Hesitantly, I guessed an equilateral triangle? That's right. Looks like you're not mentally challenged after all. I thought a genius like Yuyue would breeze through explaining problems. Because for people like her, these are things they can solve at a glance without much thought. No need for all the twists and turns. But to my surprise, she was incredibly meticulous. She explained every single point to me in detail. As I followed her line of thought, I began to understand. Bit by bit, I started to grasp the concepts, although there were still moments when I didn't fully get it. Yuyue would break it down further and explain it to me piece by piece. So, what's the answer to this problem? After a while, she put down her pen, crossed her legs and leaned back in the chair, looking at me. I cautiously replied, "The shape is twice the area of the shaded region." "Correct," she said, snapping her fingers. "Your brain still works, but your foundation is too weak. Tonight, I want you to memorize all the formulas in this book. I'll check them tomorrow." She stood up and leaned in close to me, threatening, "If you don't memorize them, I'll beat you up." Up close. I noticed her eyelashes were incredibly long, fluttering like butterfly wings when she blinked. So beautiful. How could someone be this good looking and also be so smart? What door did fate close for her? She's never even been in a relationship. If she did, wouldn't everyone be envious? Just as I was pondering this, Yuyue had already stood up. "Starting tomorrow, tell Aunt John to excuse you from evening study sessions. Don't go to evening study anymore. I'll tutor you instead." With that, she tossed the book aside and left. When my mom heard that Yuyue was tutoring me, she quickly wiped her hands and ran over. "Cheng, why are you leaving so soon? Stay and have dinner with us." Yuyue waved her hand and said, "Auntie, my mom has already prepared everything at home. I'll come next time. No need to see me off. Hurry back. I'll come again tomorrow." My mom looked at his departing figure with reluctance. She didn't turn back until he disappeared into the elevator. Then she turned to me and said, "Bo-da, your big sister came to tutor you. That's really overqualified for the task. You must study hard. Understand? In college." I picked up the book, planning to read a little longer. The problem-solving approach just now was quite interesting. I wanted to verify it again. The next day, I arrived at school early. There was one part of that approach I didn't quite understand. I wanted to ask Chen Yue, but I was afraid he would scold me. I thought about asking the teacher, but I was a bit anxious. For a student like me, aside from being called in by parents, I had never gone to the office before. Would the teacher think I was causing trouble? I hesitated as I stepped into the office. The math teacher was sipping tea. The math teacher was a middle-aged woman. Her favorite thing to do was smoke and drink tea. She could be quite fierce when scolding people. I started to regret it. And just as I was about to leave, she noticed me. "Ji Bo-da, who are you looking for?" I pressed my lips together and quietly said, "Teacher, I want to ask about a problem." I stood there a bit nervously. To be honest, the office, for students like us, always had a natural sense of authority. The moment I stepped in, I started to feel scared. The math teacher put her thermos down and naturally reached out to me. "Which problem?" I handed the book over with both hands and said, "The 7th problem." I didn't quite understand the problem-solving approach. "Why do you need to connect this point with a line?" The teacher took a closer look. "See, this line is parallel to AC. You can construct an isosceles triangle. For geometry problems, you should first think of these special auxiliary lines." The math teacher took out a ruler and started drawing lines to show me, explaining each step in detail. "Do you understand?" Suddenly, I had an epiphany. "Yes, I understand now." The teacher smiled at me. "I heard you've been acting out recently. Seems like early love isn't necessarily a bad thing. You're really something. It's not that you're not smart. You just didn't like studying before. Go on. If there's anything else you don't understand, come ask me." I felt a bit embarrassed and quickly ran out after saying thanks. Everything didn't seem as scary as I thought. I thought to myself, maybe I was making studying seem harder than it really was. In fact, as long as you put in the effort, none of this is truly insurmountable. From that day on, I no longer attended evening study sessions. Yuyue would tutor me at home. He said that tutoring me wasn't just for fun. Every now and then, he would knock on my head with a book. Sometimes, he'd hit me so hard that tears welled up in my eyes. I'd hold my head and protest that hitting my head would make me stupid. He would lazily lean against my bedhead. "You still have room to get dumber. Hurry up if you can't memorize this essay. Then don't eat dinner today." I looked at the English words in front of me, as small as bugs, feeling like all my brain cells were about to die. Can I not memorize it? This is too hard. Yuyue said while playing a game. Sure, if you can write it out, then you don't have to memorize it. You go ahead and write, I'll be waiting. I had no choice but to start memorizing each word one by one. Qianyue said my foundation was too weak. He made me memorize words every day, and he even made me memorize words for the postgraduate entrance exam. That thick book, the so-called red treasure book, it was a huge volume. I told him I was only preparing for the college entrance exam. He snorted coldly and said, if you want to get into Tsinghua, then it's necessary. Otherwise, do you think any random nobody can just get by there? If you can't even memorize this, I suggest you go apologize to everyone early and admit you're good for nothing. His words hit me hard. So every day I held onto that book and started memorizing words. In my house, the bathroom, the dining room, even by my bedside, there were word flashcards everywhere. From the moment I opened my eyes, I began memorizing until I closed them and fell asleep. Under this intense study pressure, when I looked at English test papers, though I still only half understood, it no longer felt like reading a foreign language. You have to understand, the most important thing in learning English is developing a language sense. All those so-called techniques are for ordinary people. If you want to get into Tsinghua, English must become your second language. Qianyue forced me to memorize English news articles and essays every day. I looked pitifully at the complex essay in front of me and started memorizing it sentence by sentence. After who knows how long, I finally managed to memorize it, albeit barely. Qianyue checked my progress and his expression showed a bit of pain. It's still not enough. Your foundation is too weak. But at least it's better than before. You must finish memorizing this book within 3 months. Understand? I nodded, slowly realizing a wave of twisting pain came from my stomach. I had forgotten. I hadn't eaten dinner yet. Yuyue also heard my stomach growl. He chuckled softly and said, "Go eat." The midterm exams came amidst these days of relentless studying. Sitting at my desk, I wiped the sweat from my palms with a tissue. It was time to test the results of my days of hard work. After 2 months of studying day and night, I had almost turned into a robot that only knew how to study. I was nearly finished memorizing the red treasure book. I had memorized countless English essays. I had completed so many math practice problems that they stacked up to the width of a palm. I had also copied to notebooks full of political and history notes. What kind of grades would I get? Could I possibly get close to Meiji Bo? I took a deep breath and started answering the questions. Some of these questions were familiar to me, and some were not. Yuyue refused to give me any exam tips, saying he didn't want me to take shortcuts. Looking at these questions, some resembled ones I had practiced, while others left me somewhat confused. I glanced at Meiji Bo, who was in the same exam room as me. He looked calm and collected, writing swiftly without hesitation. After a brief moment of thought, he would quickly jot down an answer on the paper. I felt a bit anxious and forced myself to stop looking at him. I cleared my mind and decided to start with the questions I knew well. In the past, during exams, I would usually just doodle, then hand in a blank paper when the time was up. Back then, time seemed to drag on endlessly, but now it felt like there wasn't enough time. I didn't have time to carefully think through many of the questions. When it was time to hand in the paper, I still had one major question unfinished. I looked over at Meiji Bo again. He had finished long ago. He had checked over his answers and was now resting with his eyes closed. I gritted my teeth, telling myself not to panic. I needed to do better in the next subject. After the exam, Meiji Bo walked over. He stood in front of me with a big smile, and in a voice loud enough for everyone around to hear, he said, "Jibo da, you couldn't cheat on this exam, could you? I suggest you give up early. Beg me, and maybe I won't make you shout at the school gate." I stared at him coldly. "I suggest you don't get too cocky too soon. We don't know yet who will be shouting. Besides, we agreed on the final exam, not the midterm. No need to be in such a hurry. His expression darkened, and he threw out, "If you don't want to save face, that's your choice." The midterm exam was conducted in the same format as the college entrance exam. It lasted for 3 days in total. I had never seriously participated in such an intense exam before. By the end of those 3 days, I was utterly exhausted. Then came the long wait for the results. When the results were finally released, I realized I was so nervous that my hands were shaking. Before I could even react, all the papers were handed to me. My classmates were whispering to each other, comparing scores. The classroom was a noisy buzz, and some were even asking about my grades, but I couldn't hear anything, only feeling my heart pounding faster and faster. I took out my calculator and began adding up my scores one by one. Chinese 98, Math 106, English 102, History 94, Biology 76, Politics 83, total 559 points. A small piece of paper was also passed to my desk. It read, 27th in class, ranked 236th in the grade. My heart suddenly sank. There are 56 people in our class. Being 27th means I'm just average. A world apart from the first place. At that moment, Meiji Bo's results were also released. He stood at the front, surrounded like the center of attention, with several people excitedly talking around him. I tightly clenched the papers in my hand, my heart twisted with tension. Without even looking, I knew Meiji Bo was at the top again. Sure enough, a boy looked at his paper and exclaimed, 683. Meiji Bo, you're incredible. Yeah, he's practically a genius. 148 in math. With that score, Xinghua is a sure thing, right? What about Liu Ryan? 679, second place. Liu Ryan responded calmly, smiling faintly at Meiji Bo. Once again, I didn't beat you this time. Meiji Bo didn't say anything. He just curled his lips and glanced back. I knew he was looking at me. Only now did I realize the distance between us made my earlier words nothing more than foolish pride. It was truly ignorant and fearless. Even if I studied to the brink of exhaustion, to the point where I wished I could study in my dreams, there was still a gap of over 100 points between us. And I knew deep down that the last 100 points would be the hardest to overcome. It seemed I really couldn't surpass him. In that instant, I clearly heard the sound of my heart breaking. Maybe I'm just not good enough. Maybe I'll never measure up to him. Perhaps I've always been just a failure. All the effort I put in before was nothing but pointless self-consolation. Not far away, Liu Ryan walked over to me. He stood above me, looking down at me, with a mix of malice and pity in his eyes. Ji Bo Da, if you're willing to apologize to him, he won't hold this against you. Ji Bo Da is very kind. You should stop causing trouble.